Hi, and in this video I want to discuss the trinkets on offer to Retribution Paladins at the start of Legion, as well as the thorny issue of stat weights. This isn't a strict guide because I'm very wary of changes which may well happen once class tuning is largely dealt with by Blizzard, or at any day now. Patch 7.1 is coming out very soon as well, and they're going to change things for then. But I am getting a lot of queries about trinkets, so let's go over the main options. So let's first of all look at how trinkets used to work in WoD. You would probably get yourself the random drop BOE, which might cost you a bit at the auction house unless you were very lucky, and the Dark Moon Fair trinket. If you couldn't afford these, you would use whichever were the two best dungeon trinkets. You'd then get into raiding and eventually get trinkets there. The actual effects of the raid trinket may or may not have been great, but it was a much higher item level, so you'd use it. In Legion, this sort of thinking is out of the window. The dungeon trinkets have a chance to Titan Forge up to the same item level as any other type of trinket, including raid trinkets, so they are still very much in the thinking. For Retribution Paladins specifically, our best trinkets all come from dungeons. Top of the list is the faulty countermeasure from Vault of the Wardens. It's worth losing a significant amount of item level for this trinket. If you don't have the faulty countermeasure at a reasonable item level, then another good on-use choice for this slot would be the Horn of Valor from Halls of Valor. If you have either of these trinkets though, don't try to equip both at the same time. You will notice that they have an on-use effect with a 2-minute cooldown. This is perfect for us, of course, because it means we can macro it to our Avenging Wrath or Crusade, using the macro just shown there, so that you're using them at the same time. But just to reiterate, because both of these trinkets have on-use effects, don't equip them both at the same time. The reason is you're not allowed to activate two at the same time, and therefore you're not going to get the benefit from at least one of them. If you have both, generally speaking, use the faulty countermeasure. For the other trinket slot, there are a number of good options. You might want the Chaos Talisman from Violet Hold, but because you can't do Violet Hold on Mythic Plus, it's much more difficult to obtain this trinket, especially at a high item level. If you can't get it, and I've never seen it, then other decent trinkets can include the Dark Moon Fair trinket Dominion, or a high item level stat stick. A stat stick trinket is one which has just raw stats on it. These regularly appear as world quest rewards and can upgrade to decent item levels. A strength, haste or strength crit trinket would usually be ideal. Memento is also a decent trinket as well. So where does this leave the trinkets from the Emerald Nightmare raid? Well, they're generally best ignored, quite frankly. The only ones that even look reasonable are the Ursoc's Rending Paw and Nature's Call. However, I'm uncertain as to how effective they are in reality. For example, the Rending Paw, I was initially told that the proc didn't occur enough, but then maybe it's been buffed a little. Sims are potentially one way to check, but they only work if they accurately model the trinket as it works in live. It may well be that a high level one could still be a good choice, so it's probably worth getting them if you've got the chance. But it is a tricky one, because at any time it could suddenly become good or just change in some way, and the model in Simcraft may not reflect it straight away, because first of all people have got to notice it's changed, then they've got to make sure they can get accurate live data to be able to model it accurately. What I would say is, generally speaking, however, the Emerald Nightmare trinkets are not great choices, but in the recent Q&A, live Q&A from Watcher, they did suggest they might be looking at them for patch 7.1, which is coming out very soon. So, can I just post up a list of trinkets in order already? Well, I can, and I'm going to with a few of the trinkets in a bit, but item level makes this difficult. For example, Heroic Faulty Countermeasure has a base item level of 825. That is blue quality, but that still makes it better than much higher item level epic trinkets. Not all of them, but a great deal of them. But it can Titan Forge up way higher. The same applies to other trinkets, so the only way to tell the difference is by simming the specific item levels. In reality, however, I can give you a little bit of a list with a little bit of a fudge to work it out for the right item level. The list of trinkets I'm going to go for are here. Faulty Countermeasure, Arcano Crystal, which is what you get off the Withered Gym boss, so that's still up this reset, but may not be next reset. Horn of Valor, Hunger of the Pack, and both of those last two trinkets come from Halls of Valor, good dungeon to get into. Ursoc's Rending Paw, Nature's Call, both from Emerald Nightmare. Chaos Talisman, and the Chrono Shard. Now, the factor that I've placed in the table here, basically, if you multiply that number By the item level of the trinket, it will come out at a number, another number. You can use that to rank them. It's a bit of a fudge. You've got to bear in mind, trinkets, the value of a trinket will change according to a number of things. First of all, a lot of trinkets will have some sort of stat on it. It might be a primary stat, might be a secondary stat. And the value of those stats varies according to how many of the other stats you've got and what the rest of your gear is like. So it's not a perfect fit. The other thing is there isn't an exactly linear relationship with item level with these either, but it's close enough for some purposes. But yeah, if you multiply this factor by the item level of your trinket, if you want to compare different ones, as long as it's from that list, I'm not doing it for all of them, goodness sake, then you will get a number that will mean you won't go far wrong if you use that to rank. That's pretty much the best I can do in terms of a BIS list. Now, just to finish off, I've had a lot of question about stat weights, so I thought I'd talk a little more about them here. The first thing to remember is that there are no set stat weights for Retribution Paladin. They just don't exist. To be honest, they never did, because they change according to talents, gear, type of fight, etc. However, in Legion, they change massively on pretty small changes. The upshot of this is that your stat weights are different to mine, and my stat weights might well change in a week's time. They've certainly changed in the last week. Because of this, I produced a video on using Simcraft to get your stat weights, as well as another video on how to more reliably get your Simcraft profile. Definitely check those out. Now, there have been a couple of misconceptions flying around regarding haste and mastery in particular that I want to clarify. The figure of 30% haste gets bandied around a lot, and I've certainly talked about it in my guides. However, I also said that you should get as much haste as you feel comfortable with, but not really go over 30%, though there are conditions under which you could, but you're unlikely to meet those conditions anytime soon. But as soon as you mention a number, people think it's a goal. Just before WoD came out, the Ret Theory crafters at one point thought 15% haste was a good thing, but then things changed. I progressed through almost all of WoD with about 5% base haste, and it was fine. But throughout the expansion, people were convinced they needed 15% haste. And the question was really, do I need 15% haste base or 15% haste buffed? What? Just because of one thing being said during beta while things were changing anyway. I fear the same will now be true of the 30%. It's entered the folklore. With haste, you want to feel comfortable with the judgment window. In most situations, this will mean having between 20% and 30% haste. In one set of gear, I have about 25% haste. I have the option to drop it down to about 20% haste for more versatility. More on why later. And at the moment, I'm fine. Also bear in mind that when Heroism and Crusade are up, you're actually having too much haste to run a comfortable rotation. You try it with a decent amount of haste, Heroism and Crusade, things are coming off cooldown before you've even used them. So much so that you're just wasting haste, and neither I nor the game can cope with it all. Further, bear in mind that when you have Heroism and Crusade going, it's because this is an important burst phase of the fight, and that haste is being devalued. So some people want to err on the side of less haste in favour of stats that are more effective during this period. Of course, the non-burst phases are important too, so you don't abandon it completely. If you find you have too much, just make sure you aren't using haste food or maybe even enchant. At the moment, for example, I'm still mostly using haste enchant, but I'm using versatility food. Then at the other end of the scale is mastery. This is consistently our worst stat, so it's generally to be avoided on gear. However, some people equate worst with the idea it's somehow a toxic stat. It's still a good stat. It buffs the damage of any holy power spender on a target with a judgment debuff. That means on a single target fight, and all of the Emerald Nightmare bosses are effectively single target fights, then mastery directly buffs your Templar's Verdict, which is your most damaging ability. So don't be concerned that you have mastery, you just generally don't prioritise it on gear because in most conditions other stats are better. However, you should still sim yourself for the up-to-date stat weights. In theory, if you found yourself with next to no mastery, and I don't think that's realistic, but if you did, you'll suddenly find mastery being your best stat because stats that lag behind the others tend to increase in value. Finally, remember that a number of things can change your stat weights, so whenever you get a significant upgrade, you might want to sim yourself again, maybe each week if you get regular upgrades. Just to highlight the effects different gear can have, if I sim myself with one set of gear, which includes roughly 25% base haste, I get stat weights that look like this. And then if I sim myself again, this is for single target and with single target talents, and I just swap out one item, a ring that doesn't have haste on but has a reasonable amount of versatility, with a versatility enchant on it, what we can see is the general order is still the same because versatility is still very highly weighted. And that is simply because I still have very little versatility. I've just gone from having basically no versatility to having some versatility. Haste is still a reasonably high stat, just nowhere near as close. So you can see even dropping down to around about 20% haste, haste is still valuable, but still not as valuable as getting more versatility. But the point would come at which I would think to myself, I'm not comfortable with this amount of haste, and I might go for a little bit more haste. So you do need to feel it first of all. You need to decide, do I feel comfortable with this level of haste outside of Crusade? And if the answer is no, if you're thinking, no, I am having bits of downtime here and it is noticeable, then by all means, ignore the sims a little bit, go for just enough haste so that you actually now do feel comfortable. And at that point, then go with the stat weights. Now that's for single target stuff, so that's what I would sort of do for raids. Then when it comes to dungeons, of course, I use different talents. In fact, I personally prefer using Zeal and Divine Hammer. Now, they both have longer cooldowns than the equivalent Crusader Strike and Blade of Justice that I use on a single target fight. So maybe haste will be more useful there. So I'm going to sim myself with both rings and see what happens. And sure enough, when my Holy Power builders are going to take longer before they come off cooldown, all of a sudden the haste jumps up massively in value. So by changing the haste ring for the versatility ring, I put myself in a position whereby the overall value of haste massively jumps up. It's basically saying, no, put the other ring back on. So what I know is that for raiding purposes, single target DPS, I'm going to use the versatility ring, but for dungeons, I'm going to use the haste ring. So I hope you found that somewhat useful. Sorry it's not possible to be more definite on either stat weights or trinket lists, but that's the nature of Legion and possibly future expansions as well. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.